This story was shared to us by a listener. I want to thank him for sharing his story. My situation is unique because I found out about my wife cheating. After she passed away, my wife grew up with both parents. They went to church every Sunday. Since she was born, we've been married for 13 years and dating. Since we were 18 years old, we have 3 kids in a house. The kids were 8, 11, and 13. When she passed away in 2020, we made around the same amount for years. She made between $3,600 to $4,000 a month as an RN. I made between $3,000 to $5,000 a month as a wholesale supplier. I saw several signs and blatantly ignored them. Here are some of the signs I ignored. Her phone was on the floor. I went to pick it up and put it on the charger. She jumped out of her sleep and asked me what I'm doing with her phone. I thought to myself, the only reason she would react in such a way if she's cheating. Another sign, we were talking in the front room. She showed me a video clip of a guy in New York who does sexual massages. I grabbed the phone from her so I can view it myself. She started going crazy and fighting me over it. I eventually gave it back to her, but the biggest sign I ignored, she said she was going to a club one night. She didn't come home until 4:30 in the morning. We had a big argument about coming home. So late, the only reason I didn't jump to conclusions she was cheating. In the first year of our marriage, I stayed out until 5 in the morning with my friend. We went to the club, then chilled outside talking. I wasn't with the girl, nor was I cheating. My phone ends up dying. So she couldn't get in contact with me. When I finally came home, she didn't accuse me of cheating and said she was concerned. She called the cops to report me missing, but she had to wait 24 hours. The last sign before she passed away, maybe 4 to 6 days prior, I asked her if I could use her phone to post clothes on Facebook for advertising. She was hesitant, then started going over her phone. I said to myself, that's something I would do if I were cheating. I reassured her I wouldn't go through her phone because I didn't want to know if she was cheating. Besides, I trust her. She gave me her phone and I went into the room. After 10 minutes of using her phone and posting on Instagram and Facebook, I decided to go in her direct message on Instagram. I went to a conversation she had with her best friend. I said to myself, if she's cheating, her best friend would know. I read a little bit of the conversation. It wasn't anything there. I went to the text messages and noticed text messages by a trainer. I saw a little bit of the conversation, then closed out because I felt bad about going through her phone. After I told her I wouldn't, that's when she walked to the room to see if I was using her phone. I told her I was almost done, but I found it odd again. I said to myself, she's showing signs of a cheater. We had a conversation months prior to her passing about cheating. I asked her if I cheated on her, what would she do? Her reply, I don't know because I have never dealt with you cheating before. I found it odd because we started dating at 18. We've always agreed the relationship is over. If one of us cheats, I told her, I'd rather you divorce me because I don't want to know. I don't know how I would react. I read stories from men murdering their family or abusing their spouse and going to jail. I have listened to songs about a guy committing suicide after discovering his wife cheating. Another song about a guy dying in a car crash after going through his girl's phone. I didn't want to be in that predicament. So, I convinced myself not wanting to know is the best option. All the signs I ignored were within the last year of her passing. She passed away in September of 2020. When I got home to tell the kids, we started crying and the kids were screaming. It's the most gut-wrenching experience in my life. It still haunts me till this day. When I think about it, I got her phone from my youngest son and asked if they knew the password. The youngest one told me the code. I told myself I would keep my word by not going through her phone, even in death. I planned on deleting the text messages when I got time to do it. I announced her passing on Facebook. I planned to keep her memory alive by posting pictures every day. I decided to bury her next to my mother, where we agreed to be buried after my mother passing. About 5 days after she passed, a guy sends her a video message from the Caribbean islands where she went on vacation. I decided to respond to him as her to find out if anything went on between them. By the conversation, they sent video messages back and forth. How are you doing conversations? I decided to call her friend and ask her about it because they went on vacation together. My wife's girlfriend, Nancy, played it off and said they took his information because they wanted a travel guide. The next time they went, she told me, your wife loved you. The day after the funeral, I wanted to post a video of her instead of a picture. I went through the trash area of her phone. As I'm scrolling, I noticed a naked picture of a man. I thought to myself, if you go down the rabbit hole, it's no turning back, but I couldn't turn a blind eye now. That's when I decided to go through her phone. When I went to her Facebook Messenger, I didn't see anything. Just conversations with her friends. I went through her text messages. It was a treasure trove of information. I read the whole conversation with the personal trainer. As I'm going back in the conversation, I found sexting, nudes, and texts saying, "I can't talk right now because he's next to me." As I'm reading everything, I became furious and started having a nervous breakdown. I'm thinking to myself, I wish she was here so I could confront her. I felt like she got away without talking to me. Now I'm brainstorming about everything. I see the personal trainer's address. I decided to Google it because it seemed familiar, and it was. I remember going to his apartment to pick up her gym clothes months prior to their sexual encounter. I felt disrespected and violated. I decided to call her best friends because I wanted answers. I had to piece the story together as much as possible. I knew they wouldn't give me any information. So, I had to trick them by threatening to expose their infidelity on social media. I called her best friend Nancy again because she dealt with her every day. She didn't want to tell me anything, but she felt compelled since she didn't want my wife's information exposed. She told me after the club one night, my wife went to a hotel and almost had sex with a guy, but he couldn't get aroused. I guess she thought that wouldn't piss me off. The friend didn't know about the guy I found in her phone. The guy she told me about was different. The friend explained when I went to the club with my wife, they would see each other and wouldn't say anything. Now I'm steaming in my head because I'm in the same club with the guy sleeping with my wife. I asked Nancy why she didn't divorce me. If she was going to cheat, she said, because she felt like you were a good father. After I heard that, I felt used and manipulated for her to stay with me because she didn't want to co-parent and handle financial obligations by herself was an insult. Especially when she's making $8,000 a month as an APRN. She got her master's in November 2019 and started working a new job in January 2020, 9 months before she passed away. I decided to call her friends to find out what went on behind my back. I barely got any information after threatening to expose her. One person told me she used to flirt with a coworker. That's it. As the days went on, after discovering everything, I read the text messages with all our friends. Nancy told my wife about her cousin being interested in her. My wife told her to give him her number. Now I'm furious as hell. I decided to call her again to speak about the situation. I'm screaming and yelling obscenities. She's gasping and sighing on the phone. I told Nancy she will never see the kids again. Now she's hurt and making excuses for her involvement by saying she got nothing to do with it. I told her, "You're the one who told my wife your cousin was interested, and exchanged numbers." A few days later, I decided to get in contact with Nancy's boyfriend and tell him about Nancy going to hotels with other men. All the information in my wife's phone, I gave him one of the guy's phone numbers so he could get in contact with him. I told him not to react right away, just get access to her phone and go through it because she switched the names around. He calls me back 2 weeks later and tells me about the aftermath. He said he waited 10 days to confront her. He went through a Facebook Messenger since he had access to it, but he didn't see much, only little signs. When he went to confront her at the hiking trail, he grabbed the phone from her and she panicked. Then said she's going to call the cops. So, he decided to break the phone since he's the one paying for it. As I'm going through my wife's phone some more, I see conversations with multiple men. I see one conversation that alarmed me with her friend, Amy. It implied the guy she almost had sex with was interested in a threesome, which seemed to intrigue my wife. I remember a conversation we had around the time. My wife asked me if I would be interested in a threesome. I told her no because it goes against my religious beliefs. Even though I would be interested, I think she was using me as a moral gauge. I saw Cash App payments from the guy to her after she went out to eat with him. Plus, I remember the day because she said she would bring some food home from the restaurant, but she changed her mind because the food wasn't good. I saw conversations with other friends saying I was jealous of her. I never specified in detail why I'm jealous of her. I'm left to assume it's over me trying to prevent her from doing something that costs her her life. She's telling associates I'm mean and nasty to her because countless arguments over finances and cleaning. She wouldn't clean up the house and spent most of her money on vacations, shopping and partying. While my money was tied up paying bills, I'm not going to lie. I was verbally abusive to her, but I felt justified in my actions because I wanted more out of life than living check to check and living in a nasty house. It was countless insults behind my back by her, to my sisters and boss. After she died and I had to take care of all the bills, I found out she was 2 months behind on the car insurance. The washer and dryer were not paid off after I gave her half of the money to take care of it. A month later, I told her the washing machine wasn't working. Her reply: it was stopped working after we paid it off. She took 15 days to pay the mortgage certain amounts after I gave her half the money to pay it before the grace period. To make matters worse, I found out she was smoking marijuana. That startled me because since teenagers we agreed to never smoke marijuana. If I knew she was smoking, I would have told her to stop or I'll leave. I decided to tell 2 of my kids about their mother's infidelity, and the not-so-kind words she expresses about her kids to Nancy's cousin. The oldest one got extremely mad and told me to remove all her pictures from the wall. The 11-year-old seemed indifferent about it. His main concern was beating up the guys she slept with. I had to explain to him why it's inappropriate when she slept with them willingly. I never told the youngest one what his mother did. I felt like he wouldn't understand. Sometimes he feels left out because his other brothers know, plus he was confused with the removal of her pictures. He said it felt like I didn't love his mother. Now I'm wrestling with the idea of moving her casket. I don't want her next to my mother. I don't want to be buried next to her. I decided to research if she could be transferred to her father's cemetery and the cost. When I decided to tell her brother about my decision, he objected to it, asking why I never had a full conversation with him or the mother over their daughter's infidelity. It felt awkward telling them since their perception of her was a righteous woman. I felt like it would be a tough pill to swallow. Her mother heard about her daughter cheating indirectly. Her niece told her I found information on her phone. I told her brother about her indiscretions in a roundabout way, but the phone hung up without me knowing. I was talking on the phone to nobody for 10 to 15 minutes. I took it as a sign. He wasn't meant to know the details. When I told my sisters about moving her, they told me not to make any rash decisions and give it a year. My wife's family doesn't want her casket moved. I decided to leave her next to my mother, but I'm not getting her a headstone, which some of the family members are upset about. I won't allow anybody else to get her one. If they decide to do it without my consent, I'll have it removed. I haven't been able to visit my mother since September the 26th, 2020. I used to visit her several times within a week. I stopped going after my wife was buried next to her. I feel like if I go see my mother, I'll be paying my respects to her as well. 3 weeks after my wife died, I met a girl and went out on a date with her and we hit it off. She ends up getting pregnant 2 months later, but the timing was horrible, especially dealing with my kids and public perception. 2 months later, after my girlfriend announced her pregnancy, Nancy decided to make a long post on Facebook using a fake page, disparaging me by saying my wife took care of the finances and kids. She stated I was in the house with the kids but I didn't take care of them. Also, she said I wasn't capable of putting half the money down on a house. Plus hinted at me cheating on my wife because it's no way my new girlfriend popped up pregnant 2 months after my wife died. One of my sisters felt the same way and asked questions in a roundabout way to debunk their theory. My daughter was born in July 2021, so my girlfriend had to get pregnant in October or November. She lived in California before coming back to Connecticut to help her mother. She came back in June 2020, 2 months before my wife passed away. Besides, my wife and girlfriend are friends with my female boss I work for at a car wash. So, it's no way possible for me to get away with cheating. I would be paranoid to pull it off. Plus, the most important part, I don't want to go to my kids and tell them the reason daddy had to leave the house because I cheated. My girlfriend planned to go back to California with her mother in a few months. She only came back to help her mother sell the condo. After getting pregnant, she stayed with me to give birth to my daughter. I'm not a big believer in karma, but somehow I feel like the string of events was timed. My wife became an RN in 2007 and started making $3,600 a month. She went back to school in 2014 to get her master's. She received her master's in late 2019. She started her new job as an APRN in January of 2020, making $8,000 a month. For the 13 years we were married, I didn't know about her life insurance policy. I knew she had one, but I didn't know the details. After she passed, I looked into everything. Her job from 2014 to 2019, she had an insurance policy for both of us for $40,000 and less for the kids. When she started her new job in 2020, she only had life insurance policy on herself for 6 figures. It shocked me. She didn't have one for the kids and took the minimum policy through her job. I'm assuming she wanted to keep as much money for herself in her paycheck. I remember having an argument with her about not having life insurance to bury me. I told her I'm not dying anytime soon, and if I do, just wrap me up and bury me without a casket. So it's not costly. At the time I was looking at life insurance with my credit union, but I was procrastinating. For years, I prevented my wife from having surgery done. When my mother died in December of 2019, I was depressed and devastated. I decided she can get surgery work done because I didn't want to control her life, but I told her I prefer her not to do it. If she does it, she's on her own. I am not going to the appointments. I don't want to know anything because I don't approve of the surgery. I was trying to deter her from doing it on her own will. She decides to do it anyway and passed away 9 days after the surgery. I feel like she had the surgery done to build up her self-esteem when she's out cheating. Recently, I found more information on my wife's phone. It's hundreds of videos of her talking to her friends. The videos are 10 to 15 minutes long, but I found a video of her talking about being in love with a third guy. She insinuated they had sex, but I don't have anything concrete because I didn't watch all the videos. Most of the conversation with the friends are about work. I don't want to invest a large amount of time watching videos all day. If her family gets upset over the headstone, I'll probably watch all the videos to cement why she can't get one. In the end, I think about it every day and get upset, especially not being able to confront her. My girlfriend says I should be happy at the end of the day. I got the house, life insurance, and the kids. After thinking about it, she's right. If my wife was alive and I found out, my life would have been upside down. I would have to stay with one of my sisters and start over. I didn't know anything about hiring a private investigator or getting evidence to prove infidelity for divorce until listening to stories on Reddit. I probably wouldn't have been able to force the sale of the house since the house is solely in her name. My credit was bad at the time and I didn't want to ruin our chances, but I put half the payment down and paid half the mortgage every month. I blindly trusted her because she went to church all her life. She held many titles in church. I thought she was incapable of cheating. If she did cheat, she probably slept with one guy. But I don't know how many men she slept with, and I'm left to conclude it could have been over 10 guys because my girlfriend found Facebook conversations on paper from 2011, 2013, and 2016 with her flirting. She was supposed to meet up with one guy, but one of the kids got sick. So, in the end, I got the house, 6 figures, the kids, and a girlfriend who will clean up and do. My wife and I were married for 10 years. I was my wife's first, and as I believed, her only sexual partner. We tied the knot when we were both 22 years old. And the incident that I'm about to share happened 10 years later when we were 32. My wife informed me that she was going on a vacation with her sister, but during the week she was away, her messages became strange and infrequent. I grew anxious about her well-being, and upon her return, her behavior only confirmed my fears. Just before the COVID-19 outbreak hit the United States, my wife mentioned feeling unwell and decided to schedule a doctor's appointment. However, she went to a second appointment without disclosing any details to me. Concerned about her health, I felt left in the dark and desperately wanted answers, so I searched her car for any appointment summaries or clues that could give me some insight. To my shock, I discovered an open STD test and a visit summary for her doctor revealing that she tested positive for herpes. My world began to crumble, and I was overwhelmed with emotions. I sat in her car for a while, staring at the trees around me, trying to process what I had just found. After discovering that my wife had tested positive for herpes, I knew that I could no longer be intimate with her. I felt scared and worried about my own health, so I decided to stay with my mother for a few days while waiting for my own test results. My wife seemed preoccupied with her own concerns and hardly noticed my absence. Thankfully, my results came back negative, meaning that I hadn't contracted the virus from her, nor had I passed it on to her. However, I still had concerns that needed addressing. I was frustrated that she hadn't informed me about her diagnosis, and I had many questions. Despite this, I realized that some answers were unnecessary, and my wife needed to confront the reality of the situation. Knowing how my wife contracted herpes wasn't a priority for me. What mattered was that she had it. During her vacation with her sister, they worked together in the same office, which gave me an idea. I received an email invitation to a work party, and it included the email addresses of my wife's colleagues and bosses. I took the opportunity to email them a picture of my wife's diagnosis, and added a message that she had brought home a present from her vacation. The response was overwhelming. Before my wife could find out what I had done, her sister called me, asking what was going on. I told her everything. When her sister called me, she admitted that she hadn't been with my wife the whole time they were on vacation. Initially, she thought it was unfair of me to share my wife's private issue with her coworkers. However, after I expressed my frustrations to her and mentioned the possibility of divorce, she began to support my actions. Suddenly, my wife appeared outside and started banging on the car window. She looked furious and terrified, screaming and crying incoherent words. I got out of the car, and she began hitting me until I revealed that I knew she had cheated on me. At that point, she couldn't hold herself together. My wife was clearly overwhelmed, and had probably not fully come to terms with her STD or her infidelity. When I revealed that I knew about her affair and the STD, she broke down in tears, trying to apologize and explain that she had used protection. But I wasn't willing to listen. I felt deeply betrayed, and I knew I could never be intimate with her again. Eventually, she went back inside defeated after I told her to pack her things and leave. Her sister, who had been on the phone during our confrontation, came over to help her pack and offer some words of encouragement about the future. My wife's motivation completely vanished when she tried to return to work. She was met with a barrage of backlash and shame from her coworkers for what she had done to me. Whether it was to her face or notes left on her desk, she was insulted, called out, and slandered. She could only endure one day of work before quitting. Her sister has been very quiet since then. And as far as I know, my wife still lives with her. I wouldn't be surprised if she's avoiding dating for a while or having trouble forgiving herself. As for me, I consider myself fortunate to have done my own investigation, and to have separated myself from her while I figured out what I needed to know. In the end, I was able to dodge a bullet. I hope that she practices safe sex and discloses both her diagnosis and infidelity to her partners. I am deeply sorry for what happened to you, OP. Your wife's actions were extremely disrespectful and breached the trust you had in her. It will be difficult for her to overcome the mistakes she made. You trusted her when you let her go on vacation without you, but she took advantage of that trust by having sexual relations with another man. It's a form of cosmic justice that she contracted an STD. It's fortunate that she didn't try to initiate sexual contact with you before you found out about what happened. You definitely avoided a disastrous outcome. It's a relief to know that she couldn't conceal her diagnosis and was forced to confront the shame she deserved for cheating on her husband. Any woman who thinks she needs someone else to love her needs a serious wake-up call. True love is meant to be between two people who communicate openly and choose to love each other unconditionally instead of taking advantage of their partner's trust. OP, I wish you all the best. You made the right decision by investigating and finding out the truth. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's move on to the second story of the day. Last Valentine's Day marked the end of my 7-year marriage with my 33-year-old wife. She was supposed to finish work at 5 p.m., but at 4:50 p.m., she sent me a text saying that her aunt had a date for Valentine's Day, and since she had trouble finding dates, she felt obligated to babysit her kids for her. I suggested that I could meet her there, but she told me it wasn't necessary. Her aunt was uncomfortable with men being at her house because her children were recovering from their abusive father, who had been out of the picture for some time. This conversation really upset me, but I decided to be just as selfless as my wife on this special day. Initially, I believed her story for about an hour. However, things changed when she posted a status update revealing her location. She made sure to block me and our mutual friends from seeing it, but she overlooked one person, her 15-year-old cousin, the child she was supposed to be babysitting. The cousin actually messaged me to ask how I was doing and shared some troubling news. The cousin showed me a screenshot of my wife's status and location, which indicated that she was having a lovely Valentine's Day at a fancy restaurant. The cousin was quite observant and noticed that my wife didn't tag me or include a photo of us together, which was unusual. Due to these inconsistencies, She suspected that something was amiss and decided to inform me. I didn't disclose to the cousin that my wife had used her as a cover-up for the babysitting lie, but I thanked her instead. Afterward, I checked the family locator app, which we never argued about. Since my wife's phone wasn't at the restaurant she claimed to be at and we were always together, I decided to dig a little deeper. I messaged one of my wife's coworkers on Facebook to inquire if she knew anything. She immediately revealed that something was likely happening between my wife and a colleague from the office. She mentioned that they would exchange work documents at each other's cubicles, but she suspected that they were actually passing handwritten notes. Additionally, she mentioned that they ate lunch together in the small office kitchen every day. It appeared that my wife and her colleague were attempting to conceal their relationship and portray themselves as nothing more than coworkers. I was surprised by how easy it was to gather information from people. Had I been oblivious all along? Although I couldn't check my wife's phone, I informed her coworker about my wife's fabricated Valentine's Day story and her current location in a different neighborhood. The coworker asked if she was at Sunny Day Development, which stunned me as it was the exact location where the colleague, lived. Apparently, my wife was at his house. I remembered showing her that spot once during a party. My wife's icon hovered over the neighborhood, and she said it was definitely close enough to be his house. I had enough. I thanked her and got off social media. I started throwing my wife's clothes and belongings out the window. Loose clothes were strewn all over the yard and roof. It started raining before she got home, and I thought karma was just giving me an extra hand. I wrote a note to put on our front door that read, "Happy Valentine's Day. Don't bother coming back ever again." When she got home late, I could hear her screaming and freaking out. She pounded on the door and repeatedly rang the doorbell, but I had barricaded myself inside. I could hear her talking on the phone with her mother and father, and it seemed like they were surprised that she was locked out of her own house with her clothes strewn across the yard. She insisted that she didn't know why this was happening, but eventually she broke down and admitted to lying about having a date with someone else. She had asked her father for help in moving her belongings elsewhere. I could only imagine that her parents questioned her motives, but all she could say was that she didn't know. She had refrained from telling me about the situation as she feared my reaction. When she finally disclosed what had happened over the phone with her father, she sounded remorseful and ashamed of her actions, like a pitiful little girl who had made a grave mistake by lying and on her spouse, thinking she could get away with it. Her father arrived to help her and I stepped outside to confront them both. I told them that I had learned of her infidelity while she was away, and despite her tearful denials and accusations of exaggeration, I challenged her to prove me wrong by showing me her messages with the other person involved. I confronted her about the other person involved, and her face turned pale when I mentioned his real name. Despite her denial of having any messages with him, I could sense her father's disappointment, and I asked him if he believed that she was lying. He hesitated, feeling embarrassed, but eventually agreed with me. This caused her to start screaming and wailing, eventually dropping to the ground. I sternly told her to gather herself because she was an adult who made the conscious decision to cheat on me and deceive me on Valentine's Day. Now she had to face the consequences of her actions. Her devastation was evident, and I could sense that she didn't want our marriage to end that night. Although she didn't want our marriage to end, she made the decision not to return to our home, leaving behind her beloved dog without the opportunity to say goodbye. Fortunately, we never had children because it would have been even more heartbreaking. Her actions serve as a lesson to others to carefully consider the consequences of betraying the trust of the person who matters most in their life. Every action has its own set of repercussions, and she had to face the consequences of hers. She stayed with her parents for some time, but they were extremely disappointed and skeptical of her words. She was not allowed to leave her parents' house unless it was for work. And even then, she had to return promptly as any delay was unacceptable. I'm sorry to hear about your wife's betrayal on Valentine's Day. Although it's just like any other day, the fact that it's associated with true love makes it even more hurtful. I'm relieved that you were able to uncover the truth through your investigation. It's fortunate that the person your wife used in her lie came forward, unaware of her involvement in the deception. Your ex-wife turned a kind gesture into a falsehood that was difficult to accept. It's impossible to sustain a relationship built on such a foundation of dishonesty. It's difficult to even imagine how one could have a healthy relationship with your ex after what she did. She needs to mature and understand the value of loyalty and honesty in a relationship. Without those qualities, she doesn't deserve the benefits of a romantic partnership. Despite the difficulty, you made the right decision to distance yourself from her. I wish you the best of luck moving forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. You think you know someone, right? I mean, after years of marriage, kids, the whole 9 yards. But then one little DNA kit turned my world upside down. Her birthday was coming up, and I thought, hey, let's do something fun, something different. So I got us those ancestry kits. Trace your roots, see if you're secretly a Viking or something. She seemed off about it, hesitant, but she did it, swabbed her cheek, sent it off. Just a bit of fun, I thought. Then the results came. It was supposed to be a revelation about her family tree, but it turned out to be about ours. There I was, staring at a screen that might as well have been a sledgehammer to my life. None of the kids, not one of them, was mine. The blood drained from my face, my heart pounded like it wanted out. I mean, how does this happen? 3 kids and none of them mine? So I dug deeper, because once you fall down that rabbit hole, you can't stop. The more I found, the worse it got. Each kid had a different dad. Imagine that. My life, my family, it was a lie. A show put on by the one person I trusted most. Anger, yeah, there was plenty of that. But it was more than that. It was this cold, sinking feeling that I'd been played for a fool. So I did what any sane person would do when they feel cornered and betrayed. I hired a private investigator. She was lying about this, what else was there? The pie, a guy who looked like he chewed nails for breakfast, got to work. And what he found, it wasn't pretty. My wife, the mother of my kids, had a string of affairs stretching back years. Photos, messages, the kind of proof that you can't just explain away. Sitting there in my living room, with my whole marriage scattered around me in photos and papers, I realized something. I'd been living in a fantasy, thinking I had a family, a loving wife. But it was all smoke and mirrors. This wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. This was about my life, my identity. Who was I, if not the husband, the father I thought I was? That's when the idea started forming. A dark seed in the pit of my stomach. If my life was going to fall apart, I wasn't going down alone. She had to pay for this, for the years she stole from me, the lies, the deceit. I know what you're thinking. Revenge is a road that goes nowhere good. But at that moment, it was the only road I could see. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. I'd always thought that was just a fancy line from a movie. But there I was, planning my own cold dish. Started with the money. You see, if things went south, I didn't want to be left with empty pockets. So I began moving my assets bit by bit, nothing too obvious, just enough to secure my future. Then I turned my attention to her, to the woman who made a fool out of me. It wasn't about grand gestures of revenge, no. It was the little things, small enough to make her question her own mind. I'd move her keys, switch off the alarm she'd set, hide that novel she was reading. It sounds petty, but you see, it's the little things that get under your skin. But the real game changer was when I sent those DNA results to the biological fathers. Anonymous, of course. I wanted to see her world crumble piece by piece. And it did. First, there was the wealthy businessman, the real father of our oldest. He showed up one day, out of the blue, demanding answers. I watched from a distance as they argued in the driveway, her face white as a sheet. That was just the beginning. Her fortress started to fall apart. I could see the cracks appearing, the doubt, the fear. It was in the way she looked over her shoulder, the way her voice shook on the phone. I'd planted the seeds, and now I was watching them grow. And then there was the isolation. Friends, family, I made sure the rumors reached them all. Whispers of affairs, of lies, of things no one wants to hear about a loved one. One by one, they started to distance themselves from her. She was toxic, and they didn't want to get poisoned. Watching her like this, you'd think I'd feel triumphant, powerful even. But the truth? It was emptier than I'd expected. Each step of my plan, each little victory, it didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, there was this hollow feeling like I was carving out pieces of myself along with her. But I couldn't stop, not after coming this far. I had to see it through, had to make her feel just a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. It was no longer just about revenge, it was a lesson. A punishment for her betrayal. So I kept at it, watching as the life we'd built together, the life she'd lied about, fell apart around her. And as I stood there, in the shadows of our crumbling world, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal old wounds, it just cuts new ones. The plot thickens, right? There I was, setting the stage for the grand finale of a marriage that was nothing but a sham. I went a step further, a step darker. I planted evidence to make it look like she was mixed up in some shady business. It wasn't hard to do. A few forged documents, an anonymous tip to the cops, and the stage was set. I watched from the shadows as the police handcuffed her. She was confused, scared, emotions I'd become all too familiar with. But things don't always go as planned. She was released, no solid evidence to hold her. Still, the seed of doubt was planted, not just in her mind but in the eyes of everyone who knew her. The whispers started, the sideways glances, she was tainted, even if she was innocent of this particular crime. And then she began to suspect. She knew someone was orchestrating her downfall, but she couldn't put the pieces together. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But every time that feeling crept up, I remembered the lies, the betrayal. The divorce papers were the next act. I filed, citing her infidelity. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, signing those papers, admitting to the world that my marriage was a lie. But it was necessary, a part of the plan. The proceedings were brutal, every affair, every lie was dragged into the light. I watched as her face crumbled, not just from guilt but from the realization that it was me pulling the strings. She tried to reconcile after that, said she was sorry, that she'd change. But it was too late for sorry. My heart had turned to stone. I looked her in the eye and told her it was over. No emotion, just cold, hard finality. The custody battle was a massacre. The biological father stepped in, and with the evidence of her affairs, her instability, it was an open and shut case. She lost the kids, the only innocent victims in this twisted game. But the real blow came when she realized it was me. The man she'd married, the father to her children, the one she'd betrayed. I was her nemesis. The look in her eyes, that mix of bewilderment and betrayal, it was a punch to the gut. But I couldn't let myself feel. Feelings were what got me into this mess. In the end, she was left with nothing. No husband, no kids, no friends. Her world, once filled with lies and deceit, was now just an empty shell. Looking back, I wonder if it was worth it. The satisfaction of seeing her brought to justice was overshadowed by the emptiness of my own victory. I'd won the battle, but at what cost? My family was broken, my heart was cold, and the future was a bleak, unknown path. But I couldn't dwell on that. This was the path I'd chosen, driven by a need for justice, for retribution. And now I had to live with it. You ever hear the saying, be careful what you wish for? Well, I got exactly what I wished for, and let me tell you, it's not all it's cracked up to be. There she was, my once loving wife, scraping the bottom of the barrel. My plan had worked a little too well. She was broke, thanks to the divorce settlement I had meticulously engineered to leave her with next to nothing. Her reputation? In tatters. The rumors I'd spread, the half-truths and full lies had done their job. She was poison to anyone who knew her name. Jobs? No one would hire her. I saw her, going from one interview to another, hope flickering in her eyes, only to be snuffed out time and again. Then came the desperation. I watched from the shadows as she reached out to her past lovers, the ones she thought would save her. But they turned their backs, one after another. They wanted nothing to do with the woman who had lied to them as much as she had to me. It wasn't long before the threatening messages started. Anonymous, of course. I didn't send them, but I didn't stop them either. Fear became her constant companion, and I watched, part of me satisfied, part of me horrified at what I had become. The day she got evicted from her house, that was a turning point. She stood there on the curb, her life stuffed into a few boxes and bags, the home we had shared, where our kids had grown, now just a building with locked doors to her. It was a sight that would break most men, but I was past breaking. I was the architect of her downfall, and there was no turning back. I kept tabs on her, following her descent into a life I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. She moved into a dingy motel, the kind of place you wouldn't want to spend a night in. There, in that small, grim room, the magnitude of what I had done hit me. I had wanted to make her pay, to feel the pain and betrayal I had felt. But this was something else. This was not just a woman scorned. This was a life destroyed. And the worst part? I was the one who had destroyed it. Sure, she had cheated, lied, torn our family apart. But as I watched her in that motel room, I couldn't help but feel that I had gone too far. Revenge, it turns out, is a double-edged sword. Cuts your enemy, sure, but it cuts you too deep into the bone. I realized then that this was no longer about her or what she had done. It was about me, about what I had become in my quest for vengeance. I had lost sight of who I was, of what mattered. I was no hero in this story. I was just another villain. So there we were, both of us lost in our own ways, both of us paying the price for our actions. Her, living in a rundown motel, and me watching from a distance, a spectator to the tragedy I had authored. It was a bitter lesson, but one I had to learn the hard way. Revenge doesn't heal old wounds, it just opens new ones. Life's funny, you know? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. There she was, my wife, living in some rundown motel, the kind of place where hope goes to die. She was scraping by, a shadow of the woman she used to be. And me? I was watching from a distance, feeling this hollow satisfaction. I had won, but the tasted like ash. Then out of the blue this guy shows up. Someone from her past. A blast from the life she had before me. He was slick, the kind of guy you don't trust at first glance. But she was desperate, drowning, and he was offering a lifeline. She took it, of course. What choice did she have? This guy, he wasn't just an old flame. He was trouble with a capital T, I could see it. But she was too far gone, too lost in her own mess to notice. He started pulling her into his world. A world of quick fixes and shady deals. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. He had her wrapped around his finger, manipulating her into doing things, illegal things, for a quick buck. It was all about the money for him. And her? She was just a pawn in his game. I found out about it, the whole sordid affair. Part of me wanted to step in to save her from herself. But another part of me, the part that was still burning with betrayal and anger, wanted to let it play out. So I did nothing. I just watched as she spiraled further down the rabbit hole. Before long, she was involved in some high-risk scheme cooked up by this guy. It was bad news, the kind of thing that gets you in deep trouble with the wrong kind of people. She was in over her head, playing a dangerous game with no idea of the rules. I remember thinking, this is it. She's finally hit rock bottom. It was a mix of pity and relief. Pity for the woman I once loved, who was now caught in a web of her own making. And relief that it wasn't my problem anymore. But even then, deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. You don't just walk away from a life you've shared with someone. Not completely. The memories, the good times, they have a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. So there I was, caught between my desire for revenge and the remnants of the love I once felt for her. It was a tough spot, watching someone you once cared about destroying themselves. But I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. In the end, life isn't black and white. It's a million shades of gray, and sometimes you find yourself lost in the shadows, wondering how you got there and where you go next. Life's a gamble, they say. You roll the dice, take your chances. But what happens when every roll comes up snake eyes? That's where she was, my wife, caught in a losing streak that just wouldn't quit. The scheme, her big shot at redemption, it blew up in her face. Big time. There she was, mixed up in something that had danger written all over it. And as luck would have it, it all went south. She managed to get out, but it was a close call. Too close. Now she was on the run, a fugitive with the law snapping at her heels. It was like something out of a bad movie, except it was real and she was the star. Me? I heard about her mess, of course. It was all over town, the whispers, the rumors. Part of me thought I should feel something, guilt maybe, or even a twinge of concern. But there was nothing. Just a numb indifference. I checked out, emotionally packed my bags and left the building. She tried to reach out to the kids, a desperate move from a desperate woman. But they wanted none of it. They'd heard the stories, seen the evidence. To them, she was a stranger. A ghost from a past they wanted to forget. It was harsh, but that's how it was. You reap what you sow. There she was, all alone with nowhere to turn. I heard she was thinking of turning herself in, making a clean breast of it. Maybe she thought it would be a fresh start, a way to wipe the slate clean. But fate, it seems, had other ideas. Before she could make her move, they got to her. The people she'd crossed, the ones she'd wronged in that failed scheme. They weren't the forgiving type. No, they were out for blood, and she was their target. The news of her capture reached me, like whispers through the grapevine. Did I consider stepping in? Playing the hero? Saving her from the mess she'd made? The thought crossed my mind, but it was a fleeting one. I was done, out of the game. This was her fight, not mine. So I did nothing. I stayed out of it, let the chips fall where they may. Some would call it cold, heartless even. But when you've been burned as bad as I had, the heat just doesn't touch you anymore. There was a time when I would have done anything for her, moved heaven and earth to make her happy. But that time was gone. A distant memory faded by lies and betrayal. I was a different man now, hardened, cynical. In the end, it was a sad state of affairs. She was out there alone, facing the consequences of her actions, and I was here living a life that no longer had her in it. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the person you once shared everything with was now a stranger, a ghost haunting the edges of your life. But that's life, isn't it? Unpredictable, unforgiving, a game of chance where sometimes you lose more than you bargained for. Ever heard the phrase, when it rains, it pours? Well, for her, it was a never-ending storm. There she was, finally out of the clutches of those she'd wronged, but what was left? Her life, once a picture-perfect postcard, was now just a tattered, faded photograph. Ruined. She was free, sure, but it was the freedom of a bird with broken wings. She was haunted, you know? Not by ghosts or anything like that, but by her own past. Everywhere she looked, she saw shadows of the mistakes she'd made. Paranoia became her constant companion, a nagging whisper in her ear that wouldn't quiet down. It was a sad sight, seeing someone who used to be so full of life now jumping at shadows. And me? I was putting the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. The divorce papers, once just a threat, were now a reality. Signing them felt surreal, like I was signing off a part of my life, a chapter that was closing forever. It was done. The ties that bound us, the promises we made, all severed with a few strokes of a pen. But life goes on, right? You can't just stop living, even when your world's turned upside down. So I found solace where I could, in my work, in the little things that made up my day-to-day life. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. It's funny how life works. One day you're married, you've got a family, a plan. The next, you're single, starting over, the past just a memory. But it's not just about moving on, it's about finding peace. Peace with what happened, peace with yourself. She tried to start over too, but it wasn't easy. The past has a way of clinging to you like a stubborn stain that just won't wash out. She struggled, fought to find her footing in a world that seemed to have turned its back on her. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her, about what she was going through. But it was like thinking about someone from another life, a distant, faded echo of a time that was gone. I had my path, she had hers. Our roads had diverged, and there was no turning back. In the end, I found a kind of peace, a quiet acceptance of how things turned out. I threw myself into my work, found joy in the little things. A good cup of coffee, a quiet evening, the satisfaction of a job well done. It was a simple life, but it was mine. She, on the other hand, was still searching, still trying to find her way out of the labyrinth of her own making. It's not easy, starting over when you're carrying the weight of your past on your shoulders. But that's the thing about life, it goes on whether you're ready for it or not. So there we were, two people who once shared everything, now living worlds apart. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but sometimes that's just how the story goes. Starting over. Sounds simple, right? Just a matter of picking yourself up, dusting off, and stepping into a new day. But for her, it was like climbing a mountain with no peak in sight. She tried, God knows she did. Tried to leave the past behind, to carve out a new path for herself. But the past, it's like a shadow that never quite leaves you alone. She was a pariah, shunned by on her. Finding a job? That was a joke. Even the most menial tasks were denied to her. Her reputation preceding her like a bad smell. And her health, it wasn't holding up either. Stress, they say, can break you down, and it was doing a number on her. The once vibrant, lively woman I knew was fading, wilting under the weight of her new reality. Then came the bombshell, the cruel twist of fate that would break her once and for all. She found out, somehow, someway she learned that it was me pulling the strings, that I was the architect of her downfall. The look in her eyes when she confronted me, it was something I'll never forget. Betrayal, pain, a deep, unspoken sorrow. It was like looking into the eyes of someone who's lost everything. That confrontation, it was the last time I saw her. She was broken, a shell of the woman she once was. There was no fight left in her, no fiery comeback or vengeful plot. Just a deep, overwhelming sense of defeat. As for me, I thought I'd feel victorious, knowing that she finally understood the extent of my revenge. But victory? That feeling never came. Instead, there was this hollow emptiness, a realization that in my quest to bring her down, I'd lost a part of myself too. The last I heard, she was living on the fringes, a ghost wandering through a life that had slipped through her fingers. Her choices, her actions, they had led her here. But I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt, a sense of responsibility for the path she was on. Life has a way of teaching you lessons you didn't know you needed to learn. I thought revenge would bring closure, but all it brought was more pain, more regret. Looking back, I wonder if things could have been different, if there was a path we could have taken that wouldn't have led us here. But wishing, it doesn't change the past. It doesn't heal the wounds we've inflicted on each other. We were both casualties in a war that neither of us won, a war that left us both broken in our own ways. In the end, this isn't a story of triumph or redemption. It's a tale of loss, of love gone wrong, and the price we pay for the choices we make. It's about the scars that we carry, the memories that haunt us, and the hard truth that sometimes, there's no such